Hey everyone, and welcome to Rubin's Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if being born a little early might affect how your brain develops and how you feel as you get older? Well, this new study dives deep into that question. We all know that adolescence is a really important time for mental health, with many common mental health challenges showing up before we turn 18. But what about kids who had a bit of a rough start, like being born too soon or preterm? This research looked at young teens, specifically those between 10 and 14 years old who were born very preterm or with low birth weight. The big question was, do these kids face more mental health problems, and how can we help them better? They also wanted to see if a common tool used to screen for mental health issues, called the DISYPS-III, works well for these kids. It is a tricky business because sometimes different tests are used, and that makes it harder to get a clear picture. So, what did they do? They gathered information from over 200 young people, all around 12 years old on average, who were born prematurely or were low birth weight. They used a questionnaire, the DISYPS-III, which is designed to flag potential mental health challenges. And here is a key finding. These young people born preterm reported having more mental health challenges overall compared to kids born full term. This is a really important piece of the puzzle, suggesting that we need to pay extra attention to this group. The introduction tells us that a growing amount of research points to being born preterm as a risk factor for mental health issues later in life, including in adolescence. This is a critical time because, as you saw in the abstract, half of all mental disorders start to show up before age 18. Think of adolescence as a super sensitive time for brain development. It is a period of lots of change and growth, and that makes teens more vulnerable to mental health issues. So, if someone already had a challenging start, like being born preterm, this vulnerability might be even greater. The researchers really wanted to understand what these specific mental health challenges look like in these young people. If we know what to look for, we can offer better support and improve their future well-being. One of the big challenges they highlighted is that different studies use different tools to measure mental health. This makes it hard to compare results and create effective screening programs. They also mentioned that sometimes researchers rely only on what parents or teachers say instead of asking the kids themselves, which might miss some important information. They specifically noted that some common screening tools like the DISYPS-III they used are usually for ages 11 and up. But in Germany, kids often switch schools at age 10. This transition can be stressful. So they wanted to see if the DISYPS-III could work for 10-year-olds, especially those born preterm. Let's zoom into how they did this study. They used data from the German Neonatal Network, a group that tracks babies born very early or with very low birth weight. They selected participants who were between 10 and 14 years old for their study. In the end, they had 225 young people in their study, with a good mix of boys and girls, and their ages ranged from 10 to 14. They made sure these participants were indeed born very preterm, or with low birth weight, based on the gestational age and weight at birth. The main tool they used was the DISYPS-III screening questionnaire. This isn't a diagnostic tool, but it helps identify if someone might be experiencing certain mental health symptoms. It covers a broad range of potential issues. This questionnaire looks at symptoms in two main ways. First, it has sections for specific types of problems like ADHD or anxiety, but it also groups symptoms into broader categories. Externalizing problems, which might be things like acting out, internalizing problems, which could be more about feeling down or anxious, and attachment-related problems. They were interested in whether these broader categories were a better fit for the preterm group. A really thoughtful part of their method was how they administered the questionnaire. They read every question out loud to the participants. This is super important because it helps ensure that everyone, regardless of their reading skills or other learning differences, can understand the questions accurately. They also, in a few cases, adjusted the participants' answers if what they wrote or said clearly didn't match what the researchers observed during the session. For instance, if a child said they never fidget but were visibly fidgeting the whole time, this shows they were really trying to get the most accurate picture possible. They mention a few ways their approach differed from the standard DISYPS, the third use, like including the 10-year-olds and reading questions aloud, which we've discussed, and also taking clinical observations into account. They also wisely excluded a question about suicidal thoughts because they couldn't provide immediate support in their study setting. Now, on to the results. When they analyzed the data, they found that the structure of the DISYPS-III questionnaire seemed to hold up well, even when they included the 10-year-olds. This suggests the tool is pretty consistent across the age range they studied. They did notice some slight differences in how consistent certain scales were for their preterm group compared to the general population data. For example, the OCD scale was actually more consistent for their group, while scales for autism spectrum disorder, social behavior, and attachment problems were a bit less consistent. A really important finding was that the 10-year-olds born preterm reported similar mental health challenges to the older teens, 11 to 14 in the study. This means the challenges weren't just showing up later, they were present in this younger group too, reinforcing their idea that screening should start early. This is a big one. When they compared the preterm group to a simulated group of kids born full term using the DISYPS-A data, the preterm adolescents reported significantly more mental health challenges across the board. This confirms that being born preterm is linked to a higher burden of these issues in adolescence. It wasn't just a small difference, it was consistent. More of the preterm kids were scoring higher on the questionnaire, meaning they were reporting symptoms more often. This elevated reporting was particularly strong in those broader categories: externalizing, internalizing, and attachment-related problems. This suggests that these general patterns of challenges are more prevalent in this group. They also looked at differences between boys and girls. While overall mental health challenges were similar, female adolescents born preterm reported significantly more internalizing problems, meaning they might struggle more with things like anxiety and depression. This finding about internalizing problems in girls was a strong signal. When they looked at the specific types of problems, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD symptoms were the most common and highest reported in the preterm group. This aligns with previous research that has linked preterm birth to higher rates of ADHD. They also noted something interesting about ADHD. Those diagnosed with the inattentive type of ADHD, meaning they might struggle with focus but not necessarily be hyperactive, reported even more overall mental health challenges and a greater number of other co-occurring symptoms. This highlights a potential nuance within the ADHD diagnosis itself for this group. Another area that showed elevated symptoms was developmental disorders. This makes sense, as preterm birth can sometimes be associated with developmental differences. The study also explored something called the preterm behavioral phenotype, or PBP. This is an idea that kids born preterm might have a specific cluster of behaviors and challenges, including ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. In this study, they didn't find evidence for a full PBP that included all three. Instead, their analysis suggested a partial link, where anxiety and autism spectrum disorder symptoms seemed to group together, but not necessarily with ADHD symptoms. They emphasized that this was an exploratory finding and more research is needed. So, what does all this mean? The main takeaway is clear. Young people born preterm are experiencing more mental health challenges during adolescence than their full-term peers. This isn't a small difference, it is significant and consistent. The good news is their findings suggest that the DISYPS-III screening tool can be used for this group, even with some adjustments they made for understanding and age. While it is a useful tool, they do suggest that maybe it could be even better if it were specifically tailored for preterm populations in the future. They really stress the importance of screening even earlier. Specifically at age 10, they point out that this is a time of big transitions like starting secondary school in Germany, which can bring a lot of new pressures and stress. Catching issues early before they become more severe is key. They also found that the broader categories of problems externalizing, internalizing, and attachment fit the data better than the specific disorder categories. This supports the idea of a transdiagnostic approach, meaning looking at the overall patterns of mental health challenges rather than just trying to fit them into specific boxes. This can be really helpful during adolescence when symptoms can be a bit all over the place. The study confirms that being born preterm is linked to more mental health struggles, and that symptoms of ADHD and developmental disorders are particularly prominent. They believe that we need to screen preterm individuals for mental health issues as early as age 10. The DISYPS with the adaptations they used, seems like a practical tool for this. The finding about girls experiencing more internalizing problems is also significant. It suggests that we need to be particularly aware of anxiety and depression in preterm born adolescent girls. Now, like any study, this one has limitations. For example, it was an observational study, meaning they can't definitively say that being born preterm caused these mental health issues, as many other factors could be involved. Also, they compared their current findings to older data from a norm sample. And the world has changed a lot. With events like the COVID-19 pandemic impacting mental health, they also mentioned that because their study was done in Germany, a wealthy country, the results might not be the same everywhere in the world. as preterm birth and survival rates differ greatly in different regions. And as we touched on before, they had to make some adjustments to the standard questionnaire administration, like reading questions aloud and using external assessments for some participants due to cognitive differences. While they tried to manage these, it does mean the results should be interpreted with these adaptations in mind. So after all that, what is the big picture? This study gives us good evidence that the DISYPS-I can be a useful tool for screening mental health in young people born preterm. It confirms that these individuals have a higher likelihood of experiencing mental health challenges. And critically, it strongly supports the idea that we need to start screening for these challenges as early as age 10 in preterm born children. Looking ahead, the researchers suggest we need to dig deeper into why these links exist. Understanding the complex interplay of genetics, what happens in the womb, during birth, and even brain development will be crucial for finding the most effective ways to help. Overall, this research is a really important step in understanding and supporting the mental health of individuals born preterm. It highlights the need for tailored screening and early intervention to ensure these young people can thrive. What do you think about these findings? Does any of this resonate with you or someone you know? Let me know in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more explorations into the fascinating world of psychology. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.